Hello wonderful people, it's Wild here. Today I'm going to be showing you some inspiration for creating paths and giving you the tips and tricks you need to know to create your own beautiful designs. Paths is such an overlooked feature when creating a build, and they can really bring a build to life. So I'm going to be showing you a range of different styles, breaking down the details that really make them pop, and giving you some tips and tricks so that when you come to creating paths in your world, you can customize them to suit your style. First, we're going to go through all of the different path designs, and I'll give you tips and tricks as we go. Then at the end, I'll give you a breakdown of how I would go about creating any style of paths. Our first path is this cozy woodland walkway. Now you could use this to lead up to a build or as just a join between two areas in your world. So let's take a walk down. You can see you feel quite cozy within here with the tall trees on either side. And as we reach the end, we can continue off to our world. If we come up, you can see that for a nature-inspired build like this one, we want to make sure we have long, swooping curves like this, as nature never has straight lines. If we come back down to ground level here, we can have a look at the path itself. For the materials for this one, I've gone with a earth-toned kind of palette. So we've got the rooted dirt, the coarse dirt, some podzol, and then some packed mud. I've also gone ahead and placed these spruce buttons, which just give a bit more texture. And up here we've got some of these spruce trapdoors. They almost look like planks, and perhaps the park ranger placed these in as there is an unstable bit of pathway here. It's fun to create stories like this along your walkway. And you could even create little alcoves like this one. Here I've just created a campfire setup. By adding in elements like this and the boards that we have over there, it helps break up a long pathway and provides you with some visual interest as you're on your journey. For this pathway, I've just kept the lighting simple, placing some lanterns along these fences that I've used to denote the way you walk. You can also see I've framed the pathway with trees. If you're creating this in a woodland, you could plant the trees yourself or just clear out a pathway. But if you're going to clear out the area for your walkway, I recommend leaving a lot of space on either side and then planting in a few trees once you've got your path in place. That way you can have the trees follow the shape of the walkway itself. Our next style of pathway is a cottage garden inspired path, and it really is an explosion of colour. Let's take a walk. Again, I've gone with a curved path design as this is a nature inspired path. And then I've got large garden beds on either side. If we come up, you can see that I framed either side of the garden bed with these tall hedges. Now, of course, you can leave these out, but it does provide a lovely backdrop behind the flowers, so it really pops. Another option here would be planting a line of trees behind here. Now, you could have whatever flowers you like, but I've gone with a color palette using the 3 tall flowers. We've got the roses, the peonies, and the lilacs, and then I've pulled these colors into the smaller flowers as well. I've also tucked a little bit of wheat in here for that cottage garden feeling. As for the structural elements in this pathway, we've got some lanterns hanging over the pathway like this with the fences, and I've created a destination point with this swinging bench. For the pathway itself, I've gone with a gravel type pathway, but instead of just using plain gravel blocks, I've mixed in some dead coral blocks. Here we've got some dead tube coral, some dead horn coral, and we've got some dead fire coral as well. I've also placed in some of the suspicious gravel. Now, you might not be able to attain this in survival, but it still looks great without that in there. It's just another thing to add texture. My tip here is that if you're going to have a lot of color like with these flowers, one option is to go with a natural kind of neutral route for the rest of your elements. So we've got our neutral spruce, we've got our neutral pathway, and it really lets the flowers shine. The other thing I'd like to point out here is a cross section of the pathway. You can see that I've done a planting scheme where the flowers kind of swoop up. We've got short at the front, then a medium height, and then our tall hedge at the back. To bring a bit of height towards the sides of the path, I've got my tall lanterns, and then I've got some of these taller hedges. So it's nice to have a balance between low elements and tall elements. For this next style of path, we've got a more formal design. For the pathway, we're using a simple checkerboard pattern of gravel and the smooth stone blocks. This is a really striking design and it's achieving contrast through mostly texture rather than colour. For this pathway, I've added in a feature of a water fountain. Water features are a great element to add to any pathway. You could create a fountain like this one, have a structurally designed water feature, or have something natural like a pond or river. Looking from above, you can see that one of the great elements of this design is the contrast between the clean lines in the built elements like the fountain and the pathway, and the chaoticness of the planting. We've got a tiered planting system here, but the planting within it is very natural. So we've got the tall grasses and ferns, we've got some grass lining the pathway, and the juxtaposition between the chaos and the orderly really draws your eye in. This next pathing option is a really fun one. Let's take a walk. I've gone with a raised bridge sort of design here, and I've got it going at different heights. And of course, you can have this continue on, you could have it branch off in multiple directions, and have staircases leading off to different sections of your build. This tropical design would work great for a desert build or in a bamboo biome. I've got mine here on the sand, but it would work fine over grass or mud as well. For this tropical design, I've created some custom palm trees. So I've got a smaller one and a larger one back here, and I have them almost arching over the pathway itself. Now, if you'd like a tutorial to create these trees, make sure you check out the video in the description below. I've also created some tiki torches to light up the space. Lighting is such an important feature of any pathway as you don't want to be walking in the dark. So for these, I've just got some bamboo with a campfire on top as well as some signs, and they are perfect for this theme. Even when you're creating a walkway like this one where we're using just one kind of block, it's important to bring in a little bit of visual interest with texture. So here I'm using both the bamboo slabs and the mosaic bamboo slabs, and I've placed them in a sort of random fashion just so it breaks up the straight lines created by the planks. Because this pathway has such a cool lighting option, let's check it out at night. So you can see what a wonderful warm glow these tiki torches add to our walkway. Now, if you're extra worried about mob spawning and survival, a good thing to keep in mind with any pathway is that they cannot spawn on slabs, so this whole section of the pathway is spawn proof. And then for sections where you're not at a slab height, you could always mix in some buttons like this and place them at different angles just to break it up. Or you could use some pressure plates. All of these blend in very nicely. By placing them kind of randomly like this, it helps break up the design, and mobs can't spawn on any of these blocks now. Before we move on to the next path, I wanted to take a look from above to have a look at the shape of the path. You can see that like all my other nature-inspired paths, we have a nice curved design. However, this one is a little bit more stark as that adds to the geometric shape created by these bamboo blocks. And of course, you could customize this walkway design by switching out the blocks. It would also look great in junglewood in a jungle biome, or you could use it in any biome by tying into the blocks in that biome itself. Next up, we have this beautiful cherry blossom design. At the start of the pathway, I've got a grand archway inviting you in, so let's take a walk. As we walk underneath this archway, we're walking along a pathway made of cobblestone, some of this dead brain coral block, and we've got some dead bubble coral blocks as well, and then I've tied everything together by placing a mixture of glow lichen, stone pressure plates, and stone buttons on top, and you can see the wonderful cobble texture that creates. I've tied in plenty of cherry blossom elements. We've got a tree at the end and we'll visit that in a second. And for my lighting, I've used a bit of cherry around the base as well as some dark oak for the rest, and that ties in pretty well with the bark on the cherry tree. Let's walk a bit further. For the cherry tree, I've had it arch over to the side, and then I've placed in a swing, and this is just another decoration you could add along any pathway. I've taken inspiration from the beautiful cherry blossom colours for my planting, so I've stuck to white, and we can see that we've got these lighter shades of pink that ties into, as well as the pink flowers here and the pink petals on the ground. Adding in custom bushes like the ones I've got here are a great way to frame any pathway. I've gone with the birch leaves here as they have a slightly more subdued colour. We've got such a lot of colour going on with the pink of the cherry blossom that I want something a little more subtle. But if you're working with a more subdued colour palette, you could definitely use some azalea leaves here as they're nice and bright. You'll also notice along this pathway, as well as many of my other path designs, that I have these small sections of walls. This is instead of having the walls going all the way along, and it is just another way to denote the pathway and separate it from the landscape around it. I prefer to do short curved sections like this rather than having the walls run the entire length of the path, as it just gives it a little bit more of a natural worn-in look. Our next pathway design has a beautiful fantasy feel and would look great leading up to a grand enchanted build, so let's walk down here. The main feature of this pathway are its glorious arches, and we've got quite a few of them coming all the way down the walkway. You can see from above that I've used alternating sets of 1 and 2 archways paired together. And I've got lots of other fantasy blocks like these amethysts, and I've tied that purple in with the pearlescent frog lights in the arches, as well as having some sections where I've got blackstone and crying obsidian in the ground. And this is a really bold contrast between the dark colour here and the light colour we've got in the archways. I've tied this in with using some buttons along here in the same block palette, and it really helps to ground this fantasy build with those dark colours. For the walkway itself, I've gone with a simple sort of design, but I've added in these stairs, and this just adds a bit of depth to the walkway. Another element that I've added here are these sets of pillars. Now this ties in with the archways and it has a really grand feel. It almost looks like the ruins of an ancient Roman or Greek structure. If you're planning on adding several features like these archways along your walkway, you don't have to make sure they are exactly the same width apart, but you want to make sure they're spaced relatively equally. Or another option would be to have a couple in a group and then a larger gap and then another couple again. It's just about having something that feels visually pleasing and exciting as you walk along the pathway. This next design is an ice spike inspired path. Let's take a walk. For this pathway, I've created a bridge over a frozen river before we continue on our walkway. And I've framed either side of the path itself with these small quartz spikes. You can see that the path itself is a similar colour palette to the snow around it. The thing that really sets it apart from the snow is the way that we've framed the path, and that I've added in some of this darker black texture using some of the birch logs as well as some of these black stone buttons. And these are beside some diorite and some calcite blocks. We have several elements here that tie everything together with the icy theme. I've got some of these custom ice spikes, and of course if you're in an ice spike biome, you're going to have some larger ones as well, but I recommend clearing out an area around the pathway so that way the small ice spikes you build are a feature, and I've added some snow drifts coming up along these. I've also created these floating lanterns using the ice, and this is a great way to light up your build. It adds a nice overhead lighting. We've got some illumination coming from the end rods in these small quartz spikes as well as the end rods on the bridge. And let's have a look at the bridge from the side. You can see I've used the diorite which we have in our walkway, the ice which surrounds us, and then the quartz as well. And we've got a nice gentle curve here. And this path design looks so magical at night, with the beautiful hanging lanterns and all of these crystal-like end rods. It really is magical to walk along. So now that we've had a look at a whole load of different path designs, let's break down the steps to designing your own path in any style you like. The first step to creating any pathway design is to create a block palette that ties in with your style of build. So for here, I've gone with purples. We've got some blacks, we've got grey, and I'm including the textures I plan on using here, and then we've got white. I recommend sticking to 5 colours at most, like I've got here. But if you plan on having more colours involved, like we have over here on this cottage garden, it's always important to make sure you have an element that ties it all together. So here we've got a riot of colour with all of the flowers, but I've stuck to neutrals for the pathway itself. Once you've chosen your block palette, it's time to work out the shape of your path. You need to decide whether you want a natural sort of shape like this one, or a more geometric shape like we've got over here, or a raised pathway like this. Once you've decided, you can start marking it out. I start by following along a shape one wide like this and using just one of my materials. So there's my guideline. Then I widen it out to the width that I'd like. I always like to go with either 3 or 5, and 2 is okay too, like we've got over here. But odd numbers are certainly easier to decorate. Okay, so let's see, we're almost at the end of the pathway. We've made it a little bit wider. You can check you like your shape that you've created. I might just add a few more blocks here and there along the pathway, and a couple at this end as well. There we go. And once you've got your shape, you want to grab out your other blocks and start randomizing the texture. Here it's really important to make sure that you gather plenty of each material. If you have limited number supplies, it means you can't be as creative when adding in your texturing. With the shape of your path all laid out, it's time to start adding details. I like to start with large features like archways, purpose-built trees, small alcoves, and my fountains. Then you can start adding in your planting, so you could create your planters and begin filling them up, or mark out where you're going to be putting flowers. And once you've got that in, you can start adding in the fine details like lighting and fences. Over here we've got these small petals to tie the colour in. Or over here you can add in your things like bushes, extra crystals. Over here we've got the snow, everything that really brings the build all together. A few extra tips for creating your pathways. Don't be afraid to try out some unconventional blocks, and always take inspiration from the world around you. So if you're in a dark oak biome, dark oak and mushroom is always a great way to go. And always take inspiration from the builds you're working with as well. It wouldn't look any good having a formal pathway leading up to a tiny little cottage in the woods. So you've got to play into what you're working with. And don't forget, if you need some more inspiration, to check out my other path video that's in the description below. There's a load more ideas over there, so you're bound to find something to use in your build. So now you have lots of inspiration for creating beautiful paths to really elevate your builds. Be sure to leave a comment with your favorite design, and like and subscribe for more. And don't forget to check out my Patreon for some extra benefits. I'll see you in another video.